Alright, so now I figured I'd take this time for, like, over the span of a few videos to talk about the Rocky movies, which are all compiled in this Blu-ray box set that says the 40th anniversary. I'm going to assume that's for the first movie, so this probably came out like 5 years ago or something. And I just got it like earlier this year, around that time, and revisited them and found that I think I love these movies more than I let on, and more than I remember every time that I see them. So I figured we would just kind of go through them where like I would do like the first two in this video, and then 3 and 4 in another, and then 5 and Balboa in another one. And I know that my brother had talked about doing something related to one of these in Creed, then one of the Creed movies. So I figured we'll look into that since Rocky 4 has that director's cut that's supposed to come out in like November or something. That should probably be out by the time we do whatever that may be. But starting with these first two, I did talk about the first movie like way back when we first started. I think I did it as a versus with like The Fighter, I think. And since it was way back then, I'm going to assume I probably didn't do it justice. And like I said, I've seen them multiple times since then, since that would have been like, 7 years ago or something, or 8 years ago, or whatever it would have been. So these movies like really grow on me with time. So what I'm going to say is probably completely different than what it was back then, or maybe not. I really don't remember. So to kind of just go into the first movie, and this isn't really like the versus thing we typically do. I'm just going to talk about them and just praise them, really. Until we get to 5, and then we'll see what happens. And 4 goes to some interesting places also, pre-director's cut, so... But we'll get into those. But let's start with the iconic first movie, which is really interesting right away, because it does this thing where we see the title twice as the movie is introduced. And I think what's interesting about that, I don't know what the intentions were specifically, or if there were any, if that's just the style they went with. But the way I always took the seeing the title twice thing, where we see it triumphantly go across the screen with the music playing, and then we see it again in like a normal opening credit sequence as Rocky's walking home after this fight. This fight that does a really good job at showing just how unglamorous the whole life of this sport is when you're like just kind of a nobody and just at this gym, and how they go through the whole thing and they do the fight and they've beaten the shit out of each other, and then their payment is basically just a whole bunch of subtractions, like this fee and this fee and this fee, and then, oh, by the way, here's what's left, like $40 or something, for the effort of all this. Which is why he has to have a double life as well, working with Joe Spinell, like breaking thumbs and collecting money and all that stuff. But the thing about that I love about the way those two things are revealed is it's almost like the title the first time we see it is showing what Rocky is bound to become, or is destined to become, with his name really big and really triumphant and the music playing and all that. And then it's like, but in the meantime, this is where Rocky is at the moment, and we just kind of see Rocky in small letters on the screen, very unceremonious, along with the rest of the opening credits. And it's like it's setting up that really unglamorous side that he's coming from in this very sort of... It's like this really abandoned-looking place he's coming from. Like, there's people on the streets every now and then, but it's like there's such a... almost like a loneliness factor to him when we're watching him just walk around by himself. Which is why it's so crucial that Adrian should come into play, because he's just walking around in this sort of quiet life with just really nothing going on, in a way that's clearly progressively bothering him more and more as it goes on, until this opportunity finally happens to fall into his lap. But in the meantime, another thing they do so well is really just what Stallone's bringing here in general, because being a Sylvester Stallone fan because of Rocky can sometimes be a very aggravating thing when you're trying to have discussions with people. Because obviously Stallone now, I don't know, he did get that second acting Oscar nomination for Creed back in 2015, but still, even with that in mind, he sort of got into this whole kind of pigeonholed into this area of being the action star that just had the familiar voice, and the movies, with the exception maybe Demolition Man, didn't have much of a brain to them. And nor did it seem like many of his characters. They were just there to do one-liners and blow shit up, and then that was their thing. So this whole thing got around that Stallone is suddenly a terrible actor, or whatever, or a one-note actor, or whatever you want to call it. Even with the Rambo movies going down the path that they did, starting off with the first movie that was quite serious, and then they just got more and more over the top. And that's just sort of the dude that he became, and people seem to forget that he was such... Not only was he a great presence here, but a great writer as well. Single-handedly writing this movie before he had really hardly an ounce of fame at all, if any. Just because he knew it was going to be the thing that propelled him to the status that he ultimately reached. And it's like, it's so weird how many parallels you can see watching this, and his sort of Hollywood career and how it started. But, so when you see what he was able to bring to this as an actor in an Oscar-nominated performance, you forget the sort of depth that he could find and the likability that he was able to find, and how fresh this personality that Rocky has felt in 1976, where it was a character that a lot of people felt like they hadn't really seen in a movie before, let alone like at the head of a movie, like the title role and the one we were watching, Rise. And so with that in mind, you can imagine there's some more closed-minded people that aren't even going to try to think about this when you say it. You just say it, and they'll immediately say, you're out of your mind, because I know Stallone for this particular thing, doing it but this particular way. The Brando comparisons that he got around this time there were a lot of them. And if you see the particular types of Brando he was being compared to, really the most famous kinds of Brando being On the Waterfront and Streetcar and stuff like that, yeah, it's like totally there. Like, there is definitely another universe where Sylvester Stallone has an iconic performance of Stanley Kowalski. Like, that universe is out there somewhere where that has happened. And even the fact that his character in On the Waterfront's a former boxer. Like, that's his whole drive. That's his whole famous line. And those comparisons make perfect sense when you go back to it, regardless of the reputation Stallone might have now for the movies that he's known for, and the kind of performances, if you can call them that, for what he's known for. So the balance of being able to have that likability, and then just that gentle nature to him. Specifically the Adrian scenes when he comes in, and the way he interacts with the animals, and how he wears, I don't know why, the fact that he wears reading glasses has always been charming to me. And there'll be times where he doesn't break the guy's thumbs. All these things clearly show that he has like this almost like double life happening, where it's like he's known for being this brutish sort that can beat the holy shit out of you, but it's just what he does because he feels that's what he has to do, and it's for the sport of it. Like, he's not the violent kind of person. He's like the complete opposite, especially when we see him in contrast with Paulie later, when Paulie's throwing all of his tantrums and trying to destroy the house and all that stuff. We see just how much Rocky is not the person that the person he is in the ring might lead you to believe he might be. So there's clearly a lot of complexity here going on. That, like I said, he's not only just acting, but the character that he wrote himself. And like I said, obviously the Rocky movies are iconic. It's clearly his. You could say Rambo is up there, but I'd say pretty far and away Rocky is the iconic character for him when you think Stallone. But I still feel like somehow and I guess you could also look at some of the directions that these movies themselves went. Like when we got to like when 4 gets pretty over the top, and then 5 turns out not that great. But I still don't think he quite gets the credit, like, for almost single-handedly, how all this turned out. Because obviously we have John J. Allison as the director as well, who would go on to do, like, The Karate Kid and stuff like that, Lean on Me, who is clearly great also, and really kind of took what we see now as tropes that are, like, really obvious and cliche. And that if we were to see them in a movie today, it'd be like, oh, they're still doing this thing, and then it makes the movie worse because of that. And the underdog thing was certainly nothing new when this came out either. Like, they were still dealing with, constant cliches, but it was the way they were done. Like, they completely reshaped what they were and how they were seen, to where, like, there's a lot of stuff in here that was already cliche at the time, but then just the way the movie's presented and the way Allison put it together, and the score and everything, this suddenly became the new face of those. Like, whenever those cliches would happen now, it wasn't the cliches from back before this movie. Those cliches became Rocky-based cliches. Like, it was people imitating Rocky, and then it took off all over again in a brand new form because of this. And that's the thing is, even though it was already cliche at the time, it was executed so perfectly, and I think a lot of that has to do with giving us characters that we really, really care about. Like, there's like, that's clearly, like, especially when you look at the second one also, that is the clear secret formula of the Rocky movies, at least the first two, where the fights weren't as frequent. And we literally had, like, maybe an introductory fight at the beginning, and then the final fight. And that's all there was. Everything else in between, the entire rest of that 2 hours, was strictly character drama. And that's it. Character drama and romance. And just the really sweet love story that this movie is telling with Adrian. How they seem completely opposite when you see where Rocky's coming from, and then how Adrian is this, like, really shy girl that would just live in a corner with her face covered if she could. But the way Rocky approaches her is so real, in this way that, like, he's and also the complete opposite, because where she's just practically mute for a while, he'll basically have conversations with her by having conversations with himself while she's just standing there. And you almost get the sense that that's, like, this sort of, like, there's a comfort in that, where it's like, as far as I go, being, like, having a whole bunch of social problems and literally just not having the ability to speak when I'm around people. It's like, when I meet someone that'll just talk all day, that's comforting, because it means I don't have to. And so when you see that sort of connection, you can immediately see, and just in general, how nice to her he is has been adding up for all this time. Like, I can't remember if they even established how long he's been coming into the pet store, or how long he's really known her. I'm assuming however long he's known Polly is how long he's known her, but as long as he's been, like, visiting her at the pet store and making that, like, an actual, just regular thing in his life, there's been something building, and when we're kind of coming right in on the moment that it's gonna culminate and these feelings are gonna peak, just as he's getting this opportunity also, and we get to see, like, their first date and the Thanksgiving stuff and all that. And because it's a really great portrayal of people like Polly also, because when you fall in love with this love story, it's really easy to just loathe Paulie. Just loathe the sight of him and just everything about him, especially when he gets to the point where he gets Apollo's offer, and then we get that whole sequence where everybody's coming out of the woodwork suddenly, and it's like, oh hey, now we want to be helpful. Now we want, to partake in this and not treat you like you're just some random nobody. And Paulie's right at the top of that. Like, you could say Mickey's a culprit in that. Taking away his locker and all that. The great moment when he says, he's talking about, like, Mickey's really building him up and saying, like, you got great things, you're going to do great things, and his response is just, yeah, but apparently I'm not good enough to have a locker, I guess. Paraphrasing, obviously. But with Paulie specifically, what Burt Young does here that's so perfect is this whole thing of Paulie being that guy that you really probably don't like being around that much, yet somehow you love him anyway, and he's the kind of guy that will do anything for you, even if he's not always a joy to be around, but he'll still, like, always be there anyway. And the way Burt Young was able to find that balance where we don't completely hate Paulie all the time is really well done. It's something else that's kind of almost like an unsung hero of the movie as well. But talking about how the way Rocky and Adrian interact, really bringing it to life in a way where it's like, yeah, it's one thing that they're polar opposites where he's, you know, big and tough and she's small and meek and he's constantly talking and she's never talking. There's also this one common ground of that awkwardness, that really realistic awkwardness that they do have in common. And you can see that might be the glue that's holding this together and brings them closer as it goes on. One scene that really makes that stand out is the Thanksgiving scene, after Paulie's completely destroyed dinner, like the piece of shit that he is, sometimes. And Adrian runs back to her room, and he's now forcing Rocky on her, basically. So Rocky has to stand outside her door awkwardly and try to ask her out. And just these small moments when he's like starting to talk, and then he turns and just like mimes his frustration at Paulie, is something that I can see anybody doing in that situation. Just something like just that moment where he's just mimicking his own frustration. It feels like such a real moment, and it's so small. But it's, like I said, just stuff like that that really brings the characters to life and makes them feel so real. It's just a whole machine working that when we get to that final fight, it's going to feel like all of the stakes are here. Because we know these people so well. Not just as characters we like, the people that we feel like we could meet at any given moment in real life. And that's always been the strength of these movies in general, especially these first two. And then it's talking about, like, the idea of this kind of mirroring how the movie got made in general, where Stallone was one of those guys where he had, like, small roles as, like, you know, bodyguards, or he had, like, Death Race 2000, where he was, like, the villain, and when he was in that, was it a Capone movie with Ben Gazzara, I think, where he just played, like, a bodyguard or something. All of that, and it's like, it could have very easily just been, that could have just been what his career was, and it probably would have been relatively, maybe he would have been like, maybe like a Joe Spinell, where like he would get varying degrees of kinds of supporting roles, and then maybe like one or two leads in cult movies or something. But that would have been about it. It wouldn't have been superstardom. The superstardom that still carries on today. Like, I think he just reached a peak where they talked about, with the Suicide Squad being the #1 movie when it came out, regardless of circumstances, being like, this is like, he's done it like every decade or something, which is like almost unheard of. It's like since he's been big, since this era, and it's clear to see how he's gotten to this point, and it's because he was the underdog that wrote this script and knew that writing this script was the only way he was going to get a part like this and be able to lead a movie and tell the story that he wanted to tell and be at the center of it, and have that same inspirational feel that it would take to get to that point. So it's like every time we see Rocky triumphant, it almost feels like this double-sided thing where it's Rocky triumphant about his accomplishments and Stallone about his. Which gives it a whole other sort of gravity to how, as far as this being like considered one of the ultimate, if not the ultimate inspirational movie. It might be the ultimate inspirational movie, come to think of it. And yeah, so you get this stuff, like I said, that's cliche now, but I mean, it was cliche then, but I mean, when you see the montage and that music, the song and the score itself that shows up throughout the movie, it never wears off. Like how the opening scene of the second movie is the fight, they show the fight again that's at the end of this movie, and even then it still feels just as powerful by itself. Like without the context of the rest of the movie, but we already know the context of the rest of the movie, but even then the impact is always there. It is never worn off. And if it hasn't worn off yet, I don't know that it's going to, at least any time in the near future. And so, let's get to the climax after all that, and talking about how things hold up now. Well, the thing about that is, you talk about cliches, and while it does seem like the consensus is that Rocky does cliches, just does them extremely well and completely redefined them and gave them a whole new face. I do think there's something here that's a bit unique in the fact that it's an inspirational movie, and it's something that's really gotten people hyped for years and years and years and decades. Like, decades on decades. And yet, when we basically go into the climax knowing the hero's gonna lose. So it's like, try pitching that. It's like, how does that work? And then you watch the movie and you realize exactly how it works. And he basically lays it all out there before the fight even happens, when he's laying in bed with Adrian and he's talking about, like, how, you know, all I want to do is go the distance. Like, all I want to do is, you know, do the 15 rounds and just still be standing. Like, that would be the victory. It doesn't matter, you know, if he wins, because he's more than likely going to win. We just know that. And it's like, and sometimes movies kind of set you up for that, where it's like, oh, you know, I'm definitely going to lose. There's no way I'm going to win this. Let's be realistic. I'm not going to win this. And the inspirational movie always wants the hero to win. And it's like, it's not necessarily that he's... Like, there's that line in the second movie when Apollo says, I won, but I didn't beat him. And that... And the climax of this movie is... Well, first off, there's the whole thing when, how great of a character Apollo is, and Carl Weathers' performance in particular, and how he's just constantly showboating. And I love that he's showboating so much that he literally shows up in a boat for his entrance. And it's so over the top of a character, and it's like he so doesn't care about this fight in itself. Like, he appreciates the whole thing of, hey, we're going to give the audience some sort of big, hey, you know, anything is possible kind of story, and some big inspirational thing where it's like, anybody can have a shot, anything is possible. But he knows he's going to beat the shit out of him, and he knows it's going to be an easy fight, so he thinks. And seeing that moment when he gets knocked down really early, and there's a couple of moments where he's got that flabbergasted look on his face, like, this is not the way this was going to go. Because there's even that moment when Rocky's, like, punching the meat on the news, and Apollo won't even look at the TV. Like, that's how disinterested he is in who Rocky is. He likes the Italian Stallion name, and he likes how it's selling, and he likes the event. But he had, like, no faith in Rocky whatsoever, to the point that he probably... I get the sense that Apollo didn't know what Rocky looked like until they had that one meeting when they first introduced, hey, this is going to be the guy I'm fighting. And then as soon as they parted ways, he probably forgot what Rocky looked like until the end fight. Like, he probably cared that little about who Rocky was as a person and whether or not he could fight or not. And how much he could stay in this fight before the knockout that never happened. So there is that. Now, talking about this, and we do have those moments also that we don't realize that are building up to these moments. That just kind of go by in passing because there's so much going on and there's so much stakes already. When Rocky builds up to Adrian, I've never had my nose broken, like, ever. It's like, of all this fighting I've done, of all the injuries I've had, I've never had my nose broken. And when he breaks his nose for the first time in the fight with Apollo, it's just another thing that happens. There's the line where he says, my nose is broken, and Mickey says that's an improvement. That's it. That whole build-up, and it was that quick. That's how quick Rocky's whole expectations are changing, and what he's done up to this point and what he's accomplished up to this point is just changing immediately with this one fight. And the same you could probably be said about Apollo, given that Rocky also mentions that nobody's ever gone the distance with him. And this is going to be like a first. And before I talk about a specific moment in the climax, I want to, like, and this leads into that. Obviously, one thing you might talk about when Rocky comes up is the Oscars. Where it's obviously something we haven't mentioned yet that's pretty clear. Rocky won Best Picture, naturally. And director for Hamilton. But the thing about that is that if you're in, like, a Rocky circle, like, if that's the people you're talking to, it's like, of course Rocky won Best Picture. Why wouldn't it? And director, you know, of course it would. It's one of the most iconic movies ever made. But then there might be some people that are a bit upset because it was up against Taxi Driver, All the President's Men, and Network. It was a fucking juggernaut of a year. Bound for Glory was in there also, but, you know, biopics make it anyway. But those three are a really solid wall for a movie like this to have gotten around in 1976. And the thing about that, and some people were really upset that Scorsese wasn't even nominated for director. And I will say this, obviously Network cleaned up the acting categories, and that's why Stallone lost to Patty Chayefsky for screenplay. Network was a juggernaut in itself. All the President's Men clearly was a juggernaut in itself. And then Taxi Driver is considered one of the best ever. Taxi Driver, for me, I would put on a top movies list. Like if I was doing like a top 20 or 25, Taxi Driver would be there. I do strongly believe Taxi Driver is one of the best movies ever made. And I don't feel that way personally about Rocky. I do think I appreciate Rocky's iconic status and absolutely will not deny it at all. At all. But if I was making like a top 20 or a top 25, I don't think Rocky would make that cut, while Taxi Driver would. With that said, bearing in mind that Rocky is what won Best Picture that year, despite how I feel about those others, despite how I feel about Taxi Driver, there is a moment. It's kind of throughout the fight, but there is a particular moment when the fight starts to go up a notch. When we've been watching the fight this whole time, and there's no score, it's just the sound of the crowd and the sound of the punching. And them grunting and all that stuff. It's just all the sound that's in the room. And then, obviously, the Rocky's staying on his feet, and it's clear throughout that this is not the opponent Apollo thought he was. He thought he was going to be so much easier, he thought he was going to go down right away, and this is going to be simple. And he was not expecting to go all the rounds with him. But there's one particular moment here where this movie takes off on a whole other level for me. And I'm assuming everyone else. When the music does kick in. And like I said, even as cliche and parodied as the theme is now, the Rocky theme still works. It always has, and it always will. It'll always bring, like, the chills and the goosebumps and everything. But I mean specifically, this moment where the fight is really starting to go Apollo's way. And like I said, we go into this pretty much knowing Apollo's going to win anyway. And he's probably already won by this point. Like, Apollo's probably already won by the time the music kicks in. But when the music does kick in, and Apollo's just beating the shit out of him, and, like, Rocky's not even getting hits in anymore. It's just Apollo getting hit after hit in the face. And it's like, it's clear Apollo has won. It's over already. But as the music is building and building, and Apollo is hitting him, and he is just not going down. And that's like greatest of all time material. Like that, just that, I mean, the whole movie, sure, yes, all those moments. But I mean, this climax, when you are cheering, you're like on your feet cheering while the hero that we've come to love is just getting beaten beyond recognition. But it's like, and the more Apollo's hitting him, the more we're cheering because he's not going down. And it's like, what other movie on the planet is there where you can have a crowd on their feet while the hero is just getting his face smashed in? And it's like, because we've set up this goal, the idea of it doesn't matter who won this fight, as long as Rock is still standing, that's the victory. Up to and including the fact that when Apollo is announced as the winner, we barely hear it. It's barely acknowledged. He's going off and doing his own celebration, and all Rocky needs is Adrian. And then the movie makes the brilliant decision to just end right there. Just absolutely nothing else. And that's something that these movies do really brilliantly is just knowing exactly that perfect sweet spot that this is the end right here. Anything else would be excess. Just, this is the peak. Roll credits right now. And it's... yeah, I don't know what other words you can put that into that hasn't been said over the last 45 years or so about this. But the fact that this movie is still such a, for lack of a better term, I guess, such a champion in itself, and has been for this many decades, and it's not even a little dated, I don't think. I mean, yeah, the cliches and the parodies and stuff like that, but I mean, when you actually watch it, all of those things still hit like it's the first time you're seeing it. No matter how many other inspirational movies you've seen, how many even inspirational boxing movies you've seen, it still has that power. And there may even be some times where it has even more power, depending on if it hits you in like the right mood or something. Like these movies have the ability to make me an emotional wreck if I'm in the right mood. And I don't even say wrong mood, I mean right mood. Like, I want the movies to make me feel that way. And this does that. And crazy as it is, you know what else actually can get me to that point is the second one. And the thing about the second one is that I think the thing about the second one is I don't know if it's just me, but I personally tend to forget how good it is until I revisit it. Because I think it maybe has to do with the setup and knowing Rocky's opponents. Because it's like, you know, Rocky's the original. It's the one where Apollo challenges him. And then, you know, the third one has Clubber Lang and, to an extent, Thunderlips. And then the fourth one has Drago. And they get bigger and bigger as they go. But and the second one could be easily dismissed as, it's like, oh, that's just the one where he fights Apollo again. And he wins this time. So it may not be as dramatic and really meaningful that he gets the payoff that people might have been expecting in the first one. A full-on Rocky victory. But there's more to than that. As far as one getting all that credit where it sets up that there's only really one big fight in it, and the rest of that is character drama that leads up to it. That's exactly what the second one is too, only in different directions. Because obviously the first one was like the start of this love story, and then how that grew, and how he was dealing with the people that were, you know, suddenly coming into his life, and then how, you know, making amends with Mickey and to start working with him, and to try to get Paulie under control, and this whole thing with his job with Joe Spinell and how that was going to go, balanced with this, and how all that was going to turn out, and how it was just getting into the right shape to be able to just stand in the ring with Apollo, and the pressure that came with that, and how this was the biggest opportunity anybody ever had, and he's doing it for like all of Philadelphia, and making a whole statement about that, or anybody else that would be watching this. The second one obviously has different stakes, where now, you know, it's very like, what's really interesting about this is how, first off, Stallone is now directing this as well, which he would do quite frequently throughout his career, and quite well. Like, he's a pretty strong director. Like obviously some of the movies may have, you know, been whatever, or just been generic action movies or whatever, but I mean, in general, he's a pretty strong director. And I think that shows here, especially with how early it was in his career doing that. Because the interesting thing is seeing both perspectives. We got a little bit of Apollo going into the fight at the end of the first movie, where it's like, just enough to see that he was super, super arrogant and super showboaty and didn't really care about Rocky one way or the other, and didn't think he was going to be much of an opponent. And now we've got obsessed Apollo. Like, the Apollo that's really jaded, because even though he won, and that was a triumphant moment for him, for sure, it's setting in now that he didn't really, like we were talking about the line, where he won the fight, but he didn't beat Rocky. Which is such a great line, and really sets up the whole movie in itself. in that obsessive angle that he's coming from, where it's like he has to beat him now. Like the whole thing where Rocky did get his own victory cannot happen now because he's facing the repercussions of it. Like this random dude they just brought in off the street put up a fight and really stood up with him. Like he may not have been very close to beating him, but he was an extremely good fight and significantly better than Apollo could have ever thought, and could have ever imagined. And now he's getting all these letters. And the thing here about this that's very interesting is seeing Apollo obsess over this, is that Rocky is over here, and things are moving so quickly. He proposes to Adrian. She immediately says yes. There's no conflict for that. He's got all the fame. He's buying all the stuff. He's got the car. He's got, the dog collar. He's got the house. All of the really nice stuff. And they're going to have a baby. Adrian is pregnant. And just all this stuff. And he's doing the commercials, and he's making the money, and all that stuff. It's all behind him now. And all of that happens very, very quickly. And that's a lot of stuff. And so it's like, over here we've got Rocky, whose life is now on fast forward. And Apollo's over here paused on this one area, like right after the fight. And we're stuck here now. And sometimes if Apollo's not on pause, he's rewinding instead of going forward. Because he's so stuck on this and has to fix this to give himself a more triumphant victory and really just knock Rocky down many levels after his big triumph. So, because it almost might as well have been a defeat, that Rocky never went down completely. And to see Apollo grapple with that is really interesting, and how we kind of got that back and forth. And it's also really interesting that we get so much because there's his trainer that's talking to him about how, if you go out there taunting Rocky and you put out these advertisements, like, goading him into this fight, that you're going to be the villain of the narrative. And what's really interesting is how the movie addresses that, and Stallone, as the writer, addresses that. Because we really see where Apollo is coming from, and we see the desperation in him really coming through in Weathers' performance here, especially, where he gets to show off even more, and dig into this character more. And the way we see, it's like the reverse of what the first movie was, where when we see Rocky training, his heart doesn't really seem that in it. And when we see Apollo training, now Apollo has gone from the guy that wouldn't even look at Rocky on TV because he was nobody, to doing the training of his life to go up against Rocky again. And the fact that we get to see both those perspectives means that by the time we get to the final fight, we are 150,000% rooting for Rocky. But Apollo doesn't feel like a villain, really. Because like I said, even though he's, like they even point out, he's the bad guy of the narrative going into that fight, he doesn't feel like the villain of the movie. It just feels like somebody that's very, very desperate to be the triumph that he was prior to that fight. The guy that could go in and just knock Rocky down immediately. To be that guy that he thought he was going to be the first time around. And there's something in, we spend enough time on him that there's something in there that we feel that with him. So it's not like we watch Apollo train and it's like, oh, this dude's going down and I can't wait to see it. No, we're not even on the edge of our seat at the end of the movie. We are out of our seats rooting for Rocky, but still, I really love what they've done with Apollo here, and how they didn't make him like the full-on villain of the movie, despite what he would look like to the crowds within the movie. And I think, and obviously another way they do this, where, like I was saying, the movie's secret weapon is getting us as invested in the characters as possible, so that when the fight gets here, it's a really big, and we're paying attention to every swing and every punch that lands, and like every sort of minor injury or major injury or whatever, all of them count. Like every single swing or hit counts when you're this invested in the characters. So to spend the whole movie seeing Rocky try to do, like, he's like post fame, so now he's doing like the job hunting, and he's we're kind of getting another real life Stallone echo here, where it's like he's trying really hard to get a desk job, so it's, and you can equate that to like Stallone being a writer, and then it's like they're saying like, well, that's not really your thing, Rocky. Your thing is to do, you know, manual labor, or, you know, beat the shit out of people or something like that. You know, you don't want this stuff. You don't want the boring job. That feels a lot like it has the echoes of Stallone also. I'd still love to see that Edgar Allan Poe thing Stallone supposedly wrote come to fruition, because he is a really good writer, even if, you know, he can fall into that cheesy territory at times. There's a lot of really good dialogue in this, as well as there was in the first movie. Particularly his exchanges with Adrian, especially when we get our big dramatic beat where Adrian falls into a coma after giving birth. And this is something that could have been super melodramatic and super Lifetime movie, but the way Stallone handles it is so incredibly heartbreaking. This might seem hyperbolic, and it might seem like, oh, I'm not sure about that. But when I watch the scene when Rocky's telling her, you know, you just rest, like, just, you know, sleep as long as you want to, do what you have to do in order to get better, and he's doing the crying thing and everything, it feels very akin to the scene at the end of Forrest Gump, where Forrest is talking to Jenny at her grave. I feel like the emotional beats are really similar, and I feel like that's saying something. As somebody that loves Forrest Gump, that's saying something. Somebody that doesn't love Forrest Gump might feel another way, but I feel like there's something very similar as far as the emotion that those scenes get out of, at least me as a viewer. I don't know about everybody else, but and just that whole sequence where when Adrian, before the coma, Adrian was there and he was reading and was trying to get more into that, because we're talking about, like, he was already maybe considered a little slow, and then after the fight with Apollo, he obviously has, like, actual brain damage. And so him basically kind of self-teaching himself to read better. And then that's, like, one of his coping mechanisms while Adrian's in the coma is to just read to her. Because she was the one that would listen to him. And there's so much emotional weight to that. Like, it sounds cheesy when you say it out loud and you just describe it. But I mean, when you're actually watching it, it just feels so real and heartbreaking in a way that these movies have captured so well in these first two specifically. And then there's the whole thing where it's where Mickey comes into this more. And we're hitting more of those dramatic beats, particularly the scene with Mickey in the chapel, where Burgess Meredith really gets to show off just how great of an actor he was. But the thing here that makes this especially so heartbreaking, as far as Mickey's involvement, because obviously Burgess Meredith is great and also got an Oscar nomination for the first movie, but the weight they really add to Mickey here and the closeness to he and Rocky that they add, where there's a really interesting kind of mirror shot where when we see Rocky and Adrian getting married, and then like not many people are there, and then on Rocky's side we have just Mickey, like, kind of by himself. And just that in itself was so meaningful, to, like, the fact that Mickey showed up just really says something about their connection. And then, I could be mistaken, but when they're in the chapel in the hospital, while Adrian's in the coma, after Mickey has his big scene, I feel like when Mickey sits down, I feel like it's pretty much the exact placement of where he was seated at the wedding, as far as the structure of the room. And so that whole thing just feels like Mickey really becoming the most crucial he's ever become as far as Rocky's development up to this point, which you would think all of that would have been in the first movie, and there was so much more that they had to do with the Mickey character that they brought to this one, that's really great. And then it could also seem a bit cheesy when Adrian comes out of her coma, which first of all is emotionally triumphant as an audience. But the fact that she says, you know, now go out there and win or whatever, can seem pretty cheesy, because it's like, oh, it took falling into a coma for however many days or weeks to convince her, oh, Rocky should fight. But I think it's that whole thing of Adrian had her own battle to fight.
and that she got through that, and she showed that she has just as much strength. It's like, it feels similar to her arc in the Godfather movies, where she went from really, small and walked over to being one of the more powerful. Um, and here she comes out of it after having fought her own battle. Like, the whole thing where Rocky even keeps saying, like, everything regarding her pregnancy, he keeps saying, you did this, and this is your strength, and all that. And so it's like, it does feel this whole balance of, now that she's fought her battle, it's like she's telling Rocky now he needs to fight his. That being this second Apollo fight. And then that's when the montage kicks in, which is a very similar montage. It's the same beats, same music, same everything. Yet there's still like a whole difference here. I was reading something somebody wrote that was really great, where they said that they're from Philadelphia and they were around when both of these movies were shot, the first movie and the second movie. And they said that the way the montages look in both movies basically mirror Rocky's fame in Philadelphia in real life. Yeah, fictional characters can bring us there, and like bring communities there, regardless of what Bill Burr says. It's still it's still very much a thing. But the idea that during the montage in the first movie, Rocky is alone. Like, there's people kind of looking around and noticing him, but it's just him running down the streets, running by like where the trains are, and then running up the steps. And obviously the first movie, when it was being made, was very low key. Nobody really knew who Stallone was. It seemed like a small movie, and it was just doing its thing, very subtly. And then, now that the first movie has come out, and Rocky is this giant iconic figure over these last 3 years. Now, there's only like 1 year between the stories, but I believe the second movie is 79 to the first one 76, so there being 3 years. So now with him being this iconic figure, it spoke to how Philadelphia saw Rocky as a character and an inspiration, when he's doing the same montage, but now the whole fucking community is behind him, literally. And that shot of him running up the steps with all of them coming up behind him is just so huge, and so inspirational, but just massive, and just such a big moment. And like I said, with the song in the background, the song that will never get old, will never get cheesy. It's so, like, the way they were able to do almost the same thing and just capture that same triumph is so, you just can't beat that. Like, there's a reason that it kind of became the new face of what these cliches were, but when they don't feel like cliches at all when you're actually watching them. They feel, because you feel every ounce of the emotion that those are bringing, and it's really incredible. And so, at that point, and we do get freeze. Like, I think including replaying the end of the first movie, there are 4 freeze frames in this movie, 2 of which are close together in these montages. But then that gets us to our climax, where, like I was saying, it doesn't feel like Apollo is the villain of the movie necessarily, because we've gotten enough of his point of view, but it's incredibly satisfying to see this fight go down, and to be able to root for Rocky to win this in the directions that it goes. And to be so rewarded as an audience for all the drama that has happened up to this point. Even Paulie seems to have settled down a little bit. The only time he really goes back into old Paulie is at the pet store, when it's cut off by Adrian going into labor, so good fucking job, Paulie. I know it's not. It's the exertion for her trying to work so much at the pet store, but I'll blame Paulie, because fuck Paulie sometimes. We love Paulie, but fuck him too. That's what makes Paulie such a great character, is that you can say both and mean it. But what's really great about this also in the build-up is that, talking about how Apollo is coming into this fight in the second movie, is that Apollo's fighting angry now. And you can tell. And the thing is it's like, if you know enough, you know that could make Apollo extremely dangerous, because he's already an extremely skilled fighter, like one of the absolute best, one of the ultimate champions, and he's coming to the ring pissed off. So his punches are going to be really hard and really dangerous, but that could also make him really susceptible to fucking up too. So that all of that dynamic coming in from previously, like we have all the stuff now that Rocky has on the line, his entire family, including his new family, and then this reputation where he was kind of starting to fall off there when he was post fame and couldn't quite get the work he was looking for. And all of this. And so it's like this whole sort of, like they're both looking for some sort of redemption arc from different levels. So it's this sort of even smashing of giants watching this fight. And I want to say the fight is probably near double the length of the first one, but the fights just go by so quickly because you're so invested. Because like I said, you can say you're on the edge of your seat for scenes like this typically, but I think you're completely out of your seat during a Rocky fight, especially when it's the Apollo fights. When there's like so much on the line for both of them. And then, like I was saying, it's like we're not actively rooting against Apollo. It's just that we're rooting for Rocky. But with that said, it can be super satisfying in those moments when like Rocky just literally throws him into the corner and like punches him to the point that like his mouthpiece nearly flies out. And it's like stuff like that is still so satisfying because we're so invested in Rocky specifically. And it's and it's one of those moments also where it's like even when you've seen this a bunch of times and it's like the instance where you go into the first fight knowing that Apollo is probably going to win, or if you've seen the movie a billion times you know that Apollo is going to win. Going into this one once again, you go into it knowing Rocky is probably going to win, or if you've seen it multiple times you know Rocky's going to win. But there's still, every time, I don't remember ever watching one of the Apollo Creed fights in a Rocky movie and not feeling the complete, just the suspense at 100%. Feeling the whole thing as if it's the very first time I'm seeing it. I don't think I've ever watched these fights without feeling that way. I don't think they have ever lost their luster even once, or even a little bit. And there's not even like a lull in the fights either. It's not like you're just sort of waiting for something to happen, or you're waiting for it to get to the big moments where they really start to fuck each other up. It's just the whole thing is constant because, like I said, there's so much stakes behind it because we know the characters so well, and that's the key to the whole thing. Is having a reason to root for those characters. And you can just say that about any movie. It's like, make me care about the characters, and then I'll care about what happens to them. But I mean, these go into that so deeply. It's literally like you're watching characters that you know personally fight. And that you're really there. Like, you're basically there ringside. And you're that invested in it. That's how well done these are. And like I said, I always forget how good 2 is. Which is a shame. I need to watch 2 more often. So to keep reminding myself so I don't forget. But, yeah, so like I said, I'm not pitting them against each other or anything, just talking about how great they are. And so we're going to do another one of these, talking about the 3rd movie and the 4th movie. And then, like I said, the last will be the 5th and Balboa. And then we'll go on from there. There'll be other series that we're talking about through these next couple of months that we'll go through like this. So sometimes all at once, sometimes individually. So in between these, we'll keep doing more reviews and verses and all that other stuff. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.